I'd invite you to turn in your Bibles to Mark chapter 6. Mark chapter 6. And we're going to read in verse 45. We are skipping and jumping over the feeding of the 5,000 because if anyone recalls, we preached about that in February. That was during our 21 days of prayer and fasting. We talk about how Jesus feeds the sheep of his pasture, makes them lie down, in the green pasture. So we looked at that in February. So right after the feeding of the 5,000, this is what happens next. Mark 6, verse 45. Immediately he made his disciples get into the boat and go before him to the other side, to Bethsaida, while he dismissed the crowd. And after he had taken leave of them, he went up on the mountain to pray. And when evening came, the boat was out on the sea, and he was alone on the land. And he saw that they were making headway painfully, for the wind was against them. And about the fourth watch of the night, he came to them, walking on the sea. And he meant to pass by them, but when they saw him walking on the sea, they thought it was a ghost, and they cried out. For they all saw him and were terrified. But immediately he spoke to them and said, "Take heart, it is I. Do not be afraid." And he got into the boat with them, and the wind ceased. And they were utterly astounded, for they did not understand about the loaves, but their hearts were hardened. One of the first jobs I had when I was in college, I worked for a catering company. And one of the things I did not like about it is, and I think whenever you go into a new job, you always wonder, is there going to be training for this job? It's a new thing, never done it before. I've never worked in the food service, serving people kind of thing. And so I wondered, was there training? The answer, no. And so I went to my first party, the first catering party, downtown Chicago. It was at the Field Museum. That's quite a place for a party, The big T-Rex is right there looking at you as you eat the meat that you're eating. Something ironic about that, I guess. Sue is right there. And you're having the big party. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm watching people serve, and I guess I got to do it like that. I'm in a tuxedo, and that's uncomfortable too, So you're trying to serve, and I'm watching, and I'm like, God, please don't let me spill the water on somebody. I'm sure they paid a lot of money for this party. I don't want to mess it up. God help me, And I got through it. Didn't like a minute of it, but I got through it. And I didn't want to quit right away. I was like, I don't like this no training thing. I don't like this watch somebody else and just try to do it like they do it. And it kind of bothered me because I want to know, I want to read it. I'm a reader. Tell me what I'm supposed to do and then show me, and then we can do this the right way. Well, I went to another party, and it kind of solidified my whole feeling about the entire operation. I'm at this party, and again, I'm in my tuxedo, and this is before it starts, and the owner comes up to me, the owner of the whole company, and everybody's kind of on their best behavior because the owner's here now. And he walked up to me, and I thought it was going to be one of those, "Hi, I'm Niall Philyaw, I'm your new employee, good to work for you, sir," and all of this. Give me a raise, I thought it was going to be all this good stuff. And he walked up to me, did not ask me by name at all. He looked down at my shoes and said, "You really need to shine those." Turned around and walked away. And I thought, maybe this is not the right place for me. And maybe I jumped ship too early, but I did it for a few months. I did a number of parties, never got training, never knew what I was doing, but just kind of bumbled my way through it. And it reminds me that whenever you go into a new job, you kind of want to know, what am I supposed to be doing? What's the job description? What are the expectations? How do I know that my shoes are supposed to be shined if they don't tell me that? I think when it comes to walking by faith, there are things that we don't talk about enough because it would be awkward, or because maybe it would make us look not spiritual. But there are things that are definitely true about walking with Jesus by faith that are just hard things, maybe even counterintuitive things that are nonetheless true of this Christian walk. And I want to look at three of those things, and then I want to make a conclusion about what Jesus is doing in the middle of some of those hard things. All right, so look at the text with me. Here we are. We're in Mark 6, verse 45. Jesus has just fed 5,000 men, plus women and plus children, so many more than 5,000. And it says in verse, did I just flip my page? Yes, I did. There we go. It says in verse 45, immediately, there's Mark's favorite word, he made his disciples get into the boat and go before him to the other side to Bethsaida. Now, and it says he's dismissing the crowd. Now, we know from other passages that there was this kind of messianic excitement, like, let's make Jesus king. Let's do it now. And Jesus needs these people to put that out of their mind, because what they don't know is the cross is coming. And so he needs to dismiss the crowd. But interestingly, he commands his disciples, and you kind of get the force of it when it says he made them, 45. He made them get in the boat and start to go across the lake. He wants to do ministry in Bethsaida. So he dismisses the crowd. Verse 46, he takes leave of them and goes up on the mountain to pray. I don't know what he's praying about, but I've got a couple guesses. Just speculation. Maybe he's praying about the cross, because you remember Satan's temptation is, I'm going to give you all the glory of the nations if you just bow down to me. And here it is. People are ready to make him king, and he is the king. It's not like what they're doing is wrong thinking, even though it is wrong, and that the cross is coming and they don't know it. Jesus is a king. He's the king. Maybe he's praying about that, to face the cross instead of the adulation of the crowd. Maybe he's praying for his disciples who are in a boat when the wind comes up and the waves start hitting the boat, and they're not able to cross the lake very carefully or very well, very easily. I don't know. Maybe he's praying about some things like that. But verse 46 says, he goes up on the mountain, and verse 47 says, they're on the water. He's on the land. And he saw that they were making headway painfully, for the wind was against them. Apparently, he's able to see where they're at from the mountain. I'm not sure because he's up high or just because he's Jesus. He can see that they're having a really hard time in the boat. It's the fourth watch of the night, between 3 and 6 a.m. The disciples have been rowing hard and they don't seem to be getting anywhere. Here is what I notice about this faith walk and how difficult it can be, and what we don't often admit, even though we know it's true. The first one's this. If my clicker works, you want to advance me there? Thank you. Yeah, maybe it's a battery. I don't know. Number one, sometimes obedience takes you straight into a storm. Sometimes obeying what Jesus says, he commanded them to get in the boat, he sent them on their way, and there's the storm. And nobody likes to admit that. But it's got to be true, because living this life, you're not living according to let me say that again. The principles of Christ are in direct contrast to the principles of this world. The wisdom of Jesus is different than the wisdom of this world. So if you're going to obey, you're going to come into conflict with the rest of the way people live. Sometimes when you tell the truth, it gets you in trouble. Sometimes when you make a mistake and you do the honest thing and that you admit you were wrong, people come down hard on you and are not gracious to you. And you're like, why did I admit that I was wrong? Why did I even apologize? Why did I say that I sinned? Because this is what I get. But it was the right thing to do. You were honest. Sometimes obedience takes you straight into the storm. And the hard part to realize about that, the hard thing to admit is, it was the will of God that I was here on the water. When the wind came up and the waves hit it, it was Jesus who told me to go out here. What am I doing here? And the answer, you're right in the center of God's will, right in the center of the storm. How can that be? We don't like telling people that. I've been serving God for years, and it's been really, really hard. Number two, things we don't like to admit. Sometimes you don't feel the presence of Jesus. I don't understand. I get the Trinity to an extent, Father, Son, Spirit, and I get that the Spirit lives inside all believers. That's an amazing promise, and I believe it's true, that 24/7 I have the Holy Spirit living in me. But if that's true, why don't I always feel Jesus? Why do I feel like sometimes God is distant? I mean, they're in the boat. They're on the water. Jesus is on the land. That's what the text tells us. Jesus on the land, them on the sea, and they don't have him with them. And it's one of those things I still scratch my head about. Thankfully, I don't think I've walked for a long period of time without experiencing Jesus. I can't point to a lot of times in my life where I have not felt him at some point. Maybe one of the times, if I'm being brutally honest, is when I sin. And then I don't feel closeness. I don't feel the fellowship, the relationship with him. That disrupts the relationship. But it's true that sometimes you can be doing everything right, so to speak, and still feel like he's distant. The psalmists do a lot of that. God, why are you standing far off? Well, I happen to know that he's omnipresent, so he's actually all around me. But why don't I feel it? Thirdly, by the way, maybe I'd answer that. Maybe I answered that just a little bit with, you don't feel the presence of Jesus doesn't mean he's not praying for you, as he probably was on the mountain that night. And then thirdly, if you go to number 3 on the slides, thank you. Sometimes rowing harder doesn't work. Now, I know this from the parallel passages in Matthew and John that they were about maybe 3 miles out. And they're rowing harder and harder. Mark tells us it's the third or fourth. It's the, what is it, fourth? Is that what I'm saying? Fourth watch of the night. That's between 3 and 6 a.m. It probably means they were rowing for like 7 or 8 hours. Can you see him? Row. Peter's like in the front of the boat. He's not doing any work. He's like, row harder. Stop it. That's not what the text says. I can see these guys grumbling. I can see them like, oh man, why is this so hard? Why did we get sent out here? Every time we go on the boat because Jesus says so, something happens. And it's either really good, like a big catch of fish, or it's really bad, like big storm and Jesus is sleeping. Something always happens. And this is the reality. Sometimes in the Christian walk, you're trying harder and harder and harder. You're trying to make something work. I'm trying to make a relationship work. I'm trying to make my spiritual life work. I feel distant. So I'm just going to read more minutes. I'm going to pray more minutes. And if I put more time in, certainly that will lead to closeness and relationship. And certainly I'm going to fix something because I'm working hard. I'm rowing hard. And it's true that God often reminds us that just is not going to get us where we need to be. Now, I'm not demeaning their rowing because Jesus sent them out there. And I'm not demeaning people when they say, I'm going to pray longer and read my Bible longer and I'm going to serve more hours. I'm not demeaning any of that. But I am reminded that Galatians, Paul says, you started by faith and by the Spirit. Are you going to accomplish it now by works of the flesh? There's that reminder that we often come to the end of ourselves so that God says, hello, I'm still the one that does this. Reading the Bible doesn't automatically make me grow. It's the Spirit and it's Jesus that makes me grow. And I can defend that. Sometimes you come to the end of yourself and you can't make things happen. And when you come to that point, again, you're right where Jesus wants you to be. At the end of your resources, having rowed for 7 hours, or maybe for some of you 7 years, and you haven't made the progress you wanted. That's a walk of faith. And that is often the Christian life, even if we don't want to admit it. Now, what does Jesus do in the middle of it? I mean, this is the amazing thing because they obeyed Jesus. It's really hard. They don't have his presence in the boat with them. What do you do with all that? What does Jesus do with that? Well, he walks on the water to them. And, well, I think growing up, when I found out that there was parallel versions of the same Bible story, I'd always choose my favorite version, right? There is a favored version of this same story. It's the version where Peter says, Lord, if it's you, call me to come out to you. And Jesus tells him to come out, and Peter starts walking on the water. And then he sees the wind and the waves, and he starts sinking. And we love that story. I love Peter for that story, because that's That's like me. I started really good, and then I was like, I kind of faltered. I wavered a little bit. Now I'm sinking. That's a favored version of this story, but I would like to show you something that only Mark gives us. It's intentional, and I get that it's not the Sunday school version of the story that you get in Matthew and John, but it is remarkable. Well, let's try to understand the story a little bit. Let's go to the last verse. Let's go to verse 51 and 52. He got into the boat with them, and they were utterly astounded. John says they were glad. I'm not taking anything away from John. I'm sure they were very glad to take him in. But Mark says, yeah, they were glad, but they were shocked. That's important to notice the difference. They were shocked, and Mark gives us a reason why they were shocked. 4, that's the reason. They did not understand about the loaves. What happened to the fish? They didn't understand about the loaves, but their hearts were hardened. That is man, I want to understand what that means. They didn't understand the loaves, so they were shocked when Jesus walked on the water. And Mark is saying they should have reflected on the miracle of the feeding of the 5,000. They should have thought about it. What does this mean? Who is this that does these miracles? I mean, listen, if you remember a few weeks ago, you heard the sermon Pastor Dave gave, where Jesus sent out the disciples to do ministry. And they were doing miracles. They were casting out demons. They were doing the kinds of things that Jesus did. And yet, Mark is saying, when that feeding of the 5,000 happened, they shouldn't have walked out of it saying, man, it's so good to be full. That was a great meal. And in fact, some liberal theologians want to tell us that the feeding of the 5,000 was more about people sharing their food. Like maybe it wasn't really miraculous. Maybe it was like everybody brought out their picnic basket and opened it up and like shared with everybody else. No. Like Jesus did the miracle, and they were supposed to reflect on it and say, yeah, we had, 12 baskets left over? I wonder what that means. Like, who can do that? Who feeds people abundantly with bread like manna in the wilderness? Only God. And so it says their hearts were hardened. So I wonder, were their hearts hardened so they didn't understand the feeding of the 5,000? Or did they not understand the feeding of the 5,000 so their hearts became hard? Chicken or egg? Maybe it doesn't matter. Maybe you can think about that. But that's the first clue that something else is going on here with Jesus walking on the water. And it wasn't just for Peter to step out of the boat, even though I love that story. Okay, look back with me then at a very provocative phrase. Here it is. End of verse 48. About the 4th watch of the night, he came to them, walking on the sea. He meant to pass by them. He meant to pass by them. I don't think that's Mark saying, I think he was just strolling by. I mean, a few weeks ago, I went up north where we used to live and saw some friends. And on Saturday, I was kind of talking to some people, and I texted a friend and I said, I'd love to see you today. And they said, stop by the house. And I meant to stop by the house, but the day kind of got away from me and I didn't have a chance to drive over to their house and stop in. Sometimes you mean to do something, but you don't actually do it. And Mark says Jesus meant to pass by them, but he stops. I'm taking Mark literally, and I'm taking what he says about Jesus seriously. Why did Jesus mean to pass by them? Was he racing them to the other side? Sometimes I'll be driving in my car. You ever drive in a car and someone else is in your family and they're in the other car and you see them and you start to accelerate a little bit? That's called racing. We don't do that. But when we do, I lose. So, racing's not okay. But sometimes you look at the person next to you in the car and you're thinking the same thing. Who's going to get home first? I just let Christy win, you know. I don't want others to get in trouble. Is that true? You don't know? Okay. But I don't think Jesus was racing them to the other side. Can we say that? When he's passing them by, he meant to pass them by. It wasn't so that they finally get over there to the other side and Jesus is like, what took you guys so long, That's when people start lapping you in track, Come on, guys. What took you so long? He meant to pass them by. I do believe we have some Old Testament language that will help us understand that. And I'll probably need some help with this. Oh, there it is. Thank you. Oh, you're on it. Great. Job 9, verse 8 and 11. Check this out. Job's talking about God who alone stretched out the heavens and trampled the waves of the sea. Apparently, God is a God who walks on water. Not only walks, he tramples on water. That's important. But then you jump down a few verses. Same chapter, couple verses later, behold, he passes by me, and I see him not. He moves on, but I don't perceive him. Job in his pain and his suffering is like, where is God? I'm not seeing him, even though I know he's with me. I know he'll never leave me, but I just can't see him. Now, Jesus wants to be seen on the water. He wants his disciples who are rowing hard, difficult obedience, he wants them to see him. Next verse. This is a well-known verse. Moses, show me your glory, God. And God says, and the Lord, that's Yahweh, says, behold, there's a place by me where you shall stand on the rock, and while my glory passes by, I'll put you in a cleft of the rock. I will cover you with my hand. Here's our phrase, until I have passed by, then will I take away my hand. You'll see my back, but my face shall not be seen. Exodus 33, God passes by, and Moses can only see the back of him, but not the front of him. And Jesus fully reveals himself on the water. Next verse. And he said, this is Elijah. He says to Elijah, go out and stand on the mount before Yahweh, before the Lord. And behold, Yahweh passed by. But remember, Yahweh wasn't in the earthquake and the smoke and all that stuff. And the end of it says he's in the still small voice. He's in the whisper. And this is Elijah. God passes by. Next verse. This is Isaiah 43. Notice the language God uses to describe himself here. You're my witnesses, declares Yahweh, and my servant whom I have chosen, that you may know and believe me and understand that I am he. And Jesus says on the water, take courage, it is I. And you get the I am language while Jesus is on the water. So I'm starting to put this together. I got 3 puzzle pieces. Their hearts are hard because they didn't understand the loaves. Piece number 1. Piece number 2, Jesus is passing by, which is revelation language. And number 3, Jesus says, I am. It's me, which is reminiscent of burning bush. I am who I am. And suddenly I see that Jesus means to reveal himself as Yahweh, reveal himself as God. That Mark chooses carefully the language of passing by to say, this is who Jesus is. Now, maybe it's kind of weird and awkward to say this, but when they saw him, what does it sound like for 12 big, tough guys to cry out in fear? It's like one of those stories that's so true, it's so awkward, it's so like weird that it is true. It's like we all cried out like little babies that there's this ghost out there. But it's really Jesus. It's really Jesus, and he's revealing himself. So here's a conclusion I'm going to make, and this is my concluding statement, if you want to put that up. Why did Jesus walk on the water? Not to get to the other side. That's the chicken joke. He walked on the water to reveal his divinity because they didn't get it. They still were dull. And he did it to relieve his disciples. Now think about this with me. I don't like it because it does imply that maybe some of the clearest sightings of Jesus that I'm going to have in this life is during the storms of this life. I don't like that. You know the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and they get thrown in the fiery furnace, and there's a 4th guy in there. And you're like, who's the 4th guy? And Nebuchadnezzar says, it's a son of God. And I'm like, probably that's a Christophany. It's an Old Testament appearance of Jesus. I would love to have that kind of experience. Would you? As you're getting thrown into a fiery furnace? Would you like that experience? I think about Jacob wrestling with God. Oh, that would be awesome to wrestle with God. But would it? If he wrenches your hip that you feel for the rest of your life? I don't like that because I know obedience brings God's blessing. You reap what you sow. And yet sometimes I feel like I've reaped what I haven't sown. I've reaped a storm that I didn't create. Why am I here in the middle of the lake? Why am I rowing so hard? Maybe so that Jesus can reveal himself to you and show you what he's doing. And maybe you'll see it. But I'm also encouraged by this, that Jesus didn't just pass them by. He intended to pass them by, reveal his divinity to them, and go on his way. But when he saw, remember, he saw how hard it was going for them. He came over to the boat. He gets in the boat. Everything gets calm. God is not just transcendent, high and above us. He's immanent. Not imminent with an I, which is like something's about to happen. It's imminent with an A, like he's close to us. He's in us and around us. He's omnipresent. He's working for our good. And so we can say we serve a God who does good on our behalf, especially when things are hard. He is not just a God who sees what's going on, but he's a God who tramples on the waters that are bothering you. Do you hear that? That whatever storm is going on, he knows just how to smash it down and still stay above it and trample it down for you. I wish it happened within the next 7 hours like it did for the disciples. I know for some it's 7 years. And for some it's decades. But that's the Jesus you know. And here's what I want to say to you. Here's what I want to encourage you with. It's 2 Peter 1. Did you know that Peter probably was Mark's source for his gospel information? We can't prove that for sure, but people think that Peter was Mark's source, which is kind of interesting because Peter left out the story where he sank. I'll let you figure that one out. It's not in Mark's gospel, but no, that's a joke. But the reality is Mark wrote this story the way he did so that you would know that Jesus is God. And he doesn't overlook your suffering and your storms. He enters into them. And he comes into your boat. 2 Peter 1, verse 3, his divine power. If I could summarize the sermon in 3 words, I'd do it like this. His divine power. That's it. His divine power has granted to us all things that pertain to life and godliness through the knowledge of him who called us to his own glory and excellence, by which he's granted to us his precious and very great promises, so that through them you may become partakers in the divine nature, having escaped the corruption that's in the world because of sinful desire. There's a mouthful there, but I just want to call your attention to one main thing here. His power that has given you everything you need for life and godliness. You're not lacking anything if you have Jesus' presence and his divine power. But how does that come to you? Through his great and precious promises. In hindsight's 2020, right? Not for the disciples, not for the feeding of the 5,000. Their hindsight was not 2020. Now, when they saw the ghost on the lake, their hindsight was a little better. Can we agree? I want better spiritual hindsight. When Jesus tramples on one of my problems and gets rid of it, I want to know that it's him. And I want to know that he did it and give him glory. I want to know his promises so well and his word so well that when he does the things he's promised to do here, I want to have a soft heart, not a hard heart. I want to have a soft heart that perceives it, that gets it, and pleases him, because I can say, God, you're just doing 2 Peter 1. You're just doing exactly what you said you would do. I read about it, and now I see it. And when I think about what happened last week, I see how you were interacting with me. And I know it pleases you when I call it out. And I don't say, oh, miracle of the 5,000. That was just a nice sharing trick that happened at the picnic. It was not. And neither was what was happened to you last week. And if you know that, and you know your Bible, and you know your promises, I always thought, like, what's the promises? Why do I have to know all these promises of God? So that I can say, there it is. Or so I can say, it's going to happen. And it gives me hope. So may you know the precious promises of God. And when you're in the storm, may you see the presence of Jesus working in your life. And may you call it out so that you know it and other people know it, and so that you don't sound like a whiny man baby when Jesus comes to you, like the disciples. Let me pray. Jesus, I feel like I'm so dull so often, and I don't perceive what you're doing the way I should, but I want to. I don't want to have a hard heart when you come to me with help, when you keep your promises, when you act according to your character. I want to know it, and I want to praise you for it. So would you give us the spiritual perception to see it? Would you soften our hearts? And Lord, I also want to pray for those that are in the storm, even now, and that are rowing so hard. May you reveal your glory to them. And may you relieve them in your good timing. And may they be glad to bring you into the boat, as John reminds us. In Jesus' name, amen.